way back, in order to own land, you had to have a title. So that's why Lord Baltimore was granted all of the stuff, and then Prince Frederick was granted stuff from him. But if you didn't have a title, you were a commoner. You could only work the land, you couldn't own it.
Okay, I did not know that.
We'll probably cut that out. Hi, I'm Gary Hughes, Nova agent, your agent for life, and this is Yogi. He's the hardest working dog in real estate. I've been getting some questions about title companies and settlements, so I invited David Cartner from Highland Title here to answer some of those from a professional perspective. You want to introduce yourself, David?
Thank you for having me today, Gary. My name is David Cartner. I'm one of the attorneys over at Highland Title and Escrow. We are a title company that helps out with transactions in the greater DMV area, so all three jurisdictions.
So let's start with the basic question. I just got this one again yesterday when I was preparing to list a house. My client says, just what does a title company do? Why am I going to pay them anything?
So what we do is we help facilitate the transaction. So once you guys have a contract and we get the contract in, we enter it, we have to do all kinds of work in which we have to do a title search, make sure the title is clean and make sure everything is clear and ready to go. And then we facilitate helping out with the lender and everybody, all the parties involved, to make sure that the seller signs, to make sure the buyer signs, to make sure that everything is done correctly, and then to make sure everything is recorded so that your new buyer owns the property correctly and everything is good to go from that point on.
So you could say that the title company and the settlement attorney becomes the pivot point for the transaction, dealing with the county, dealing with the buyer, dealing with the seller, dealing with the lender, pulling all of the homeowners association if necessary, pulling all of those pieces together and making sure that they all meet legal requirements or pass the test for it.
Correct, yes. We are the facilitator. We kind of sit in the behind the scenes. You don't see a lot of us. We don't really come out unless there's some issue that's really going on that we have to let everybody know. But otherwise, we try to just do everything behind the scenes. We collect all the information we need, all the numbers and everything else that's involved with that. And then hopefully, by the time you see me at the table and I help facilitate the transaction and we're doing the signings, everything is good to go. And that's the first time you've heard from me and everyone's happy.
Good. So now, speaking of the first time they've heard from you, they do get inundated with email right after the title company receives the ratified contract. Why is that?
So we do need certain information from both parties. So when we send out our welcoming letter, we need certain information from the seller. We need to know their names. We need to know their social security numbers. If they have a loan out on the property, we have to get something authorized so that we can get the payoff to make sure everything is good to go. Same thing with the buyers. We'd like to know all their information, at least that we can do in case the lender has questions for us or somebody else that we need to facilitate.
Okay, so first thing they can expect is some requests for a lot of information so that you can swing into action as this pivot point.
Correct. Yep. Because all we get from the contractor is just people's names and sometimes an email address, sometimes not. We have no idea what we get. So
I know another question that I often get is about title insurance. What is title insurance? Why would someone get title insurance other than the lender?
So in every transaction you see two different policies. There's a lender policy, lender's title insurance. You'll see that on the settlement statement, and there's the owner's policy. The lender's policy is always required by the lender. That does not protect the buyer, right? So the owner's policy is the only thing that really protects the buyer of the property. And insurance is there. There are two versions, standard and enhanced. The standard covers a lot of things. The enhanced covers some more stuff. Post-policy forgery, identity theft, that kind of stuff is what the enhanced will cover and brings that in there. Like with any insurance, it is a one-time fee for them, at least for right now. You don't do this ever again. It's one part of the transaction, and it just protects. It's like a nice warm blanket to protect the borrower if anything happens down the road that we didn't see or if it was unknown to anybody, and just allows them not to worry about it ever again.
So when the title company, is not you personally, but the people at Highland, are doing the deed research and looking back and making sure that, for example, a home equity loan has been paid off and released, do you ever find errors back there?
We do, yeah, we do. We definitely see certain things regarding what's in the land records. A lot of people don't know sometimes, right? Or we find people that are very surprised that something goes on, right? And there's judgments sometimes get an IRS judgment if people did pay taxes. So in general, if an IRS judgment, even if you're in a payment plan to pay back the IRS, it still gets attached to your property. It is on the property right there immediately. And so that has to be paid off. We can't just let it sit there and continue on your payments. There's also unreleased deeds of trust or loans, lender stuff like that. If you go to refinance your property and that loan has not been paid off, or was paid off, and they didn't release it in the land records, they didn't follow through on their job, we got to go track down that release and make sure that that bank comes back in and releases it to make sure everything's good to go.
So when you say follow through on the job, you mean the lender did not send the release to be recorded, or if they did, it didn't get recorded?
Correct, yep. By law, they have 90 days to do so, and they should do so, but you never know.
We're all human. People
Exactly.
make mistakes. Errors happen. That's why we have a word for it.
Right.
So we
That's what goes
need
on.
to expect that it's possible that a mistake happened.
Yep.
But your job is to help find those mistakes if they did occur, and then get them corrected so that when this client comes in, they have a good, clean deed. Is that fair to say?
Correct, yep. That's what our whole goal is, to make sure that everybody's happy, the property is good to go, and that they have clean title, and they don't need to worry about that coming through down the road or anything like that.
So does the title company write the new deed once they've got everything?
We do. An attorney drafts the deed, so we'll draft the deed, and we'll draft it for the seller. Will sign the deed, make sure everybody's name is spelled right and everything's good to go, and then the biggest thing is to make sure the legal description is correct. A lot of times there could be scrivener's errors on the legal description. Wrong.
Scrivener, is that a person?
So just basically, yeah, exactly. It's the person that messed up, right? Yeah, so what goes on, the wrong condo unit number, or the storage space is wrong, or the parking space is wrong. So we have to make sure and go back through to make sure the title was clear and they actually did give that person this unit or that parking space or that, storage space.
I have one coming up that is very likely to have an error in it, because in the plat for the county, it's a condo at this address marked 154. However, the mailing address is Unit B.
Yep.
So the actual legal description of the property is different than the mailing address of the property, and it's easy to get.
And that's the way condos are sometimes. Depending on where they were, they'll have a different mailing address because the post office dictates the mailing address. And then the legal description is what they did from the plat when they actually designed the condo. So we see that common, especially around Arlington and Alexandria and all these areas.
So not everything is just kind of obvious. And so how could you make a mistake? It's so obvious.
Correct, right. So, the county will record stuff without checking sometimes, right? That's what goes on, so.
So now when my buyer client, makes the deposit, the earnest money deposit, the EMD, they make that out to Highland Title. Why is that? Why would they do that rather than, say, Century 21 Redwood, or to me personally?
Well, you probably don't want the liability of holding $15,000 to $20,000 checks all the time, right? So it is our task, if it's made out to Highland Title, that we will make sure that it's deposited, because we are also the facilitator. As the pivot man, we also hold all the money. So the lender sends us money, the buyer sends us money, we have all the money, and then we make sure everything is reconciled, and then we are the one that disperses all the money to everybody. And so when we hold on to it, we hold it as a neutral party. It's what it is. People feel a little bit more comfortable because it's a neutral party. It's not the buyer or the seller or anything like that, and that we have it and we can do what we make sure everything is good to go with it and everybody's good with it.
I've had clients who have moved here from California, from other states. They call that escrow. Is that functionally the same thing as
It is.
What the title company is doing?
Yep, it is. California's a little bit different. They enter into escrow, all the money kind of goes in there at the very beginning of the transaction, and then they have 30 to 40 days. Now, I'm not a California attorney, but this is what kind of goes on. But they sit around in escrow. So it actually they may have all the money up front, and it may not close for another 30 days, and then everything gets dispersed.
Can't imagine that.
It's really weird. It's really weird. And especially when people from California try to buy here in Virginia, right, or DC or Maryland, they're like, oh yeah, our money's in escrow, but we don't know when it's getting over here, right? So it's a different way of doing it.
It's totally different.
Yeah.
And in some states, like New York, the attorneys, people will have their own attorneys rather than real estate agents writing the contract, as we do here.
Yeah, exactly. You'd have both attorneys, both the buyer and the seller would have their own attorneys, and they would go look at stuff and make sure everything is good to go, and then one attorney will reconcile the deal, and then that's the way it works. But certain jurisdictions will do that. We are in a unique area for Maryland, D.C., and Virginia, because we are actually a title company. Now, we also have an attorney. We also are a law firm as well, but mainly our duty is to make sure, represent the contract, so we're not representing the buyer or the seller in the actual matter.
So the title company has done a lot of work up to this point. You've researched the title, you've made sure everything is free and clear or marketable, I think is what it says in the contract. Right? The lender, everything is going well. You have the package from the lender, you pull all that together. Now we're here at settlement day. It used to be, and some people who still own property will remember getting a HUD-1 from the Housing Urban Development-1, HUD-1 form, when you went to settlement. No more. We use an ALTA. Could you talk about why that changed, and then we'll go into what the ALTA is?
Yeah, of course. So about 5 or 6 years ago, the Consumer Financial Bureau decided to come out with a new form. They felt that the HUD-1 was too informative for both sides of the party, so they wanted to protect the borrower and the seller to make sure they didn't see everybody's business, basically.
So when you say too informative, it was sharing one person's information with another person who didn't necessarily need that information.
Correct. That's the way they felt.
So it's kind of a privacy thing from their perspective.
Yep, exactly. That's what they came up with. So they came up with two forms. They came up with a consumer, basically it's your CD, so it's your disclosure form. So it is a disclosure form that goes to the buyer, and there's a disclosure form that goes to the seller. What they dictated is that the borrower needed to have a CD and had to be acknowledged 3 days prior to settlement to make sure that there was no surprises. So back in the day with the HUD-1, people always didn't know how much money they needed to bring to the table. They were always asking questions. Things were changing on the HUD-1 on the day of. The lender wasn't involved sometimes, and everybody was it was a mess.
Sounds like it could get very messy.
Right. So they tried to clean all that up. And so about 5 or 6 years ago, that's what they did. And they came out with two forms, one for the buyer and one for the seller. Well, then we had to actually go to closing, and we had to figure out what's going to happen and what are these parties going to sign that shows that, all these numbers are good to go and that both parties signed the same document. So the American Land Title Association, which is what ALTA stands for, came out with a form. And this is what most companies use on the East Coast, at least for the title escrow companies. And so it has just enough of the seller's information about what we're paying off and everything else, what the sales price is, and just enough of the buyer's information. None of their interest rate or anything like that, or what kind of deal they got, but just all the fees that are associated with it.
So it won't have account numbers or
Correct.
social security numbers or
None of that. Right. So it's easier to actually send that out and have the parties look at it. And so they came up with that form, and there's a signature page at the end of that, and that kind of dictates that the deal is done, right? Both parties have signed. That means we've had all the money from the lender and the borrower, and we have everything here, and we're ready to go. And so that is what the form we use for everybody to see. And so that's, like I said, came around 5 or 6 years ago. That's what's around.
Now, this area, Metro DC, as you've said, is unique from, say, or different than, say, the West Coast or the North Coast. It's different than Louisiana area, which is driven by French law, where our laws are British derivatives. But are there differences between Maryland, DC, and Virginia as it regards a settlement?
Yes, especially for your sellers or for other people that are in the market that you're actually purchasing the property and so forth like that. So Virginia, what really comes down to is what happens with the money? When can we disperse everything for the seller and the agents and everybody else that's involved in the transaction? And what it comes down to is that Virginia gives us basically 48 hours or 2 business days from the time that we actually have the settlement to record and disperse. And the reason why they do that is Virginia has to be on record before they actually can disperse anything. So what we do as a title company is once everything's been signed, we have the deed, we have everything ready to go, we have to do a bring down, which means that now we have to go back to look at the land records and pull all the current, make sure nothing's been filed in between the time that we did the original title search and then the time that we actually are going to record. And so when we do that, We see it's all clean, and then we record the deed and the deed of trust, and then by the end of that, we get confirmation from the county, and then the counties will say, you're good to go, and then at that point, we can release. So, difference between Virginia and Maryland and DC. So Maryland and DC, once we have everything signed, we do not have to be on record first. So we still will do a bring down and do everything else, but we can do that behind the scenes. So at that point, we can disperse everything at the table, basically, is what we call it. And in general, the biggest thing that you're worrying about, right, is just making sure that if your sellers are actually going to buy another piece of property in a different jurisdiction besides the one they settle in, they just need to know when their money is going to be there, because ultimately it comes down to, where is my money? That's the number one concern, right? So.
And that could be very different if you're moving from California to, say, Virginia.
Right.
Because the way escrow is handled there versus here.
Yeah, it can delay a lot of things. I've done ones where people are buying property in North Carolina or New York where we have to get the money immediately at the table. So we have to rush. If it's in DC or Maryland and they're selling property, not a big deal. But if it's in Virginia, we better do that closing at 9 in the morning, and we better have that thing on record by 11 for them to have their money by like 2 o'clock.
So when we send that ratified contract to you, we need to make sure if those kinds of things are in there that we let you know so that you can plan.
Yes,
You
it's
don't
easier
want to
to plan.
figure that out at the table.
Correct. Yep.
One last question for the trivia people.
Okay.
Why do we call it a title?
A title. That I do not know, actually.
Because we're British derivative, our laws, and way back, in order to own land, you had to have a title. So that's why Lord Baltimore was granted all of the stuff, and then Prince Frederick was granted stuff from him. But if you didn't have a title, you were a commoner, you could only work the land, you couldn't own it.
Okay, I did not know that.
We'll probably cut that out. But I thought we'd wrap up with a little bit of that. David,
No.
Can you think of anything else that we haven't covered? I know we went over this really, really fast. It's a very complicated subject. Is there anything that you want to add that you think maybe either new first-time buyers or somebody maybe that hasn't been in the market in 30 years might want to know?
You go to your agent. Your agent will be able to help you out as long as possible. But when we have, we're there to help out as well. Biggest ones we see also right now, wire fraud, big deal, right? So make sure, and the borrowers need to make sure, and the buyers, and whoever else is wiring money, make sure to give us a call, right?
Okay.
Because we want to verify those instructions. That's the number one important thing. That's the biggest thing that we see in our industry that's causing a lot of headaches.
So if someone gets an email about wire instructions, they should call their title company and verify that the title company actually sent them that email.
That is correct. Yep.
Good to know.
Yep.
Fantastic. That's probably more important than all the other stuff we cover.
It might be, actually. Where's the money going? That's what we want to see. So,
That's right.
yep.
Hey, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate your coming by to explain some of these issues and try to make them more understandable.
No, I thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. I look to see you at the settlement table soon.